I don't know about you guys, but when I think of games from my childhood, very few come close to making me feel the way Sonic Adventure does. The best way I could describe this feeling is liminal spaces times nostalgia times otherworldly level design equals that feeling I get when playing Sonic Adventure. So the stages in Sonic Adventure are pretty much cemented in my brain at this point, but I have to admit that some of the levels straight up feel like they don't take place on Earth, and the more grounded ones that feel like they do just radiate a deep sense of nostalgia and loneliness. These are some of my cherry pick levels in the game that I get that vibe that I'm trying to explain. Emerald Coast. When you think of Emerald Coast, you might remember a sunny beachside-esque resort with badniks scattered around. And if you did, you're 100% right because it is exactly just that. But with the beach umbrellas and folding chairs, you'd expect to see loads of people sitting around the beach. But in Emerald Coast, the only sign of life is Sonic and said badniks. If not for the music, it becomes so desolate and lonely. But that's because the game's music probably makes up for at least 50% of its atmosphere. And this is just the proof right here. So I moved on to the next section of the map. There's usually so much going on in these areas, but without Sonic to be here and load all of the events in, it just feels like time has frozen in place. When looking back, I can't seem to shake that weird, nostalgic, lonely feeling. This section of the map feels a bit like a dream. It's just the design and the waterfall really give me an odd feeling that I can't describe. You usually zoom right past this area, but sticking around a little bit longer just lets you take it all in and maybe feel things you couldn't comprehend as a little kid or didn't really care about because you were having fun enjoying the game. The ending of Emerald Coast for me has the most liminal space vibe because when you take into account the location and how stranded you are, while also considering the fact that in the deep parts of the stage's water, it looks freaking bottomless. And I'm not generally scared of large bodies of deep water, but here it just looks really weird and intimidating. We see some of those folding chairs and beach umbrellas again, and paired with the ocean in the background, the absence of life, that uneasy, lonely feeling really reaches its peak. But not before we bring Emerald Coast to a close. Windy Valley. Now, Windy Valley, at least for the game's stages portion of the video, is the most otherworldly and bizarre. You are brought into floating landscapes accompanied by windmills thousands of feet up in the sky. Adding to the weirdness, there are patches of vibrant green grass growing on mountains that are floating in the sky above the clouds. And below all this lies the massive, seemingly bottomless ocean. The middle of the level is broken up by a tornado. I usually completed this section quickly as a kid, but I stopped to look around this time and didn't realize how uneasy it would make me feel. Especially the shot I took of this bridge. This just makes something in my brain click. And the loud wind ambience doesn't do it any justice either, but that's probably on me for having the music muted. Coming out of the tornado, you are brought to huge roads made up of steel grating. They seemingly go on forever and even form loop-de-loops. This is where the seemingly alien or inhuman structures and design come into play, and the fact that just beyond the pathway's railings is a 1,000-foot plunge into the ocean below is honestly kind of chilling. The roads, thankfully, do have an end to them, but at the end sits a lonely little island. It's only here where you get a good look at the skybox surrounding you in the stage, and you get a true idea of just how high up in the sky you actually are. You can't even see the waves of the ocean below anymore. It's only clouds that swirl around the lonely island, accompanied by the howls of the wind. The meat and potatoes of the entire video for me is one of Sonic Adventure's biggest focal points, and that being the game's hub world, overworld, or as it's officially called, Adventure Field. It's the area where Sonic travels between stages. You can find a lot of secrets in the Adventure Field, you can interact with certain characters, or enter missions to continue the game's story mode. The Adventure Field was one of Sonic Adventure's big gimmicks and one of the main features that helped give the player a sense of, vastness in the world that you play in. And nothing helps sell this better than the large areas you can explore. The cityscape of Station Square has to be one of my favorite areas to explore, and for me personally has less of the liminal space feeling, probably because there's NPCs scattered around. But some other areas that are much more vacant in the Adventure Field do give me an intense version of that liminal nostalgia trip feeling. Like this hallway that connects to the Twinkle Park elevator, which honestly you aren't supposed to see from this angle, but I thought the shot looked great, so I wanted to put it in the video. The lobby area here is another honorable mention, along with the Chow Garden, and the sunroof just above it with the clouds peeking through. Also the pool area just outside that's not too far from the entrance to the Emerald Coast stage. I also gotta talk about the skyline here in Station Square, and the Sunset Skybox specifically in this game. There's just something about it, and it makes me feel a certain way that I can't describe, but in my opinion feels and looks like something you would see in a dream. But departing from Station Square, you get to the Mystic Ruins. Bringing up the skybox again, this is probably the most open area in the entire game, as Tails' workshop sits on the cliffside of the Mystic Ruins, where you can see the sunset in all of its glory. You can also get on a minecart that takes you through the caves to a jungle section of the Mystic Ruins. Now this place kind of feels like a maze, and as a kid I would always find myself getting lost here when trying to progress the game. But something about the massive skybox here, just ahead of the jungle's cliffside, really irks me. It just sells the illusion that the jungle's stream of water spans miles, as well as the jungle itself. It just automatically begs the question, what else is inside this massive jungle? But we'll probably never know the true answer. So after taking some time and exploring, I think I finally have the answer to all of the things that I've felt and the questions that I've had whenever this game pops back into my mind. And the answers I've come up with don't surprise me at all because it just makes sense. Does this game have liminal spaces? Yes, of course it does. As I've shown in the video, the game does have liminal spaces inside, or places that give off that familiar vibe. But it's just because these parts of the games are areas we don't usually hang around in often. They're just halfway points between areas we played in as children. Liminal spaces are described as places of transition, and these places in the game are just that. We aren't really meant to be hanging around them for long, because the objective in a Sonic game is usually to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. But coming back here and exploring for a longer period of time definitely gives them an off-putting vibe, as I'm sure that would happen in almost any video game. Why is this game lonely? I think what can make this game lonely is that the NPCs in the game are used sparingly. And that's definitely not on purpose. It's probably due to the hardware limitations of the Dreamcast and the GameCube at the time, along with the level design. The way the stages work is that small sections seem to load in depending on where the player, Sonic and friends, are in that level. Not to mention some of the design feels out of this world in general, or just feels really lonely and barren. But the answer to this comes from the hardware the devs worked with. And not to mention, I played without music and voice lines, and using FreeCam, so certain things didn't load in, which definitely added to that loneliness. I also wanted to bring up nostalgia, a term that I've brought up many times to describe what I felt in certain levels of this game. It's especially noticeable when you begin to realize that we played this game during our childhood, a time when all of the worry in the world was how you were going to beat the level of the game. You didn't have any adult responsibilities. You want to go back to that simpler time, but you just can't. And the thought of playing this game, or actually playing it, brings you back to those moments, if not for a second or two, feeling that warmth of being a kid again, just playing Sonic Adventure.